Good afternoon, members and officers of the Council and members of the public. Welcome to the meeting of the Constitutional Review Working Party. Bit of housekeeping. Fire evacuation procedure. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security doors or opposite the lifts in the foyer. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green, and officers will assist you and advise you when it's deemed safe to return. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? No. I don't think there's any need for me to carry on with that side, as there's no members of the public here. Can everybody please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and they're not used to make or receive calls in the chamber while the meeting is in progress? Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public, except for any item of business where exempt or confidential information is considered following the exclusion of the press and public from the meeting. This meeting is also being recorded and will be broadcast on the internet. Would any member who wishes to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1 please announce it now? Are there any apologies for absence?
Apologies from Councillor Hart.
Thank you. And are there any declarations of interest? No, right. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of November 2021 be approved and signed as a correct record. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Rosetsky. Unless anyone has any objections to the minutes, I will take them as agreed. Thank you. Item agenda 4, which is revision to delegations. I'd ask Mr. Hughes, the Committee Services Manager, to present the report.
Thank you, Chairman. This report is asking the Constitutional Review Working Party to consider recommending that we change the scheme of delegations to authorise the Chief Executive to declare vacancies in office under Section 86 of the Local Government Act 1972. So this is where a councillor has ceased to be a councillor via a number of very specific reasons. One of those is that they have failed to attend a meeting within a 6-month period. Another one could be that they become employed by the council. Another reason why a councillor may be disqualified. They are sentenced to, or they've committed a crime and are sentenced to a prison sentence of more than 3 months, I think is another one. So very specific reasons. If a councillor passes away, that wouldn't be covered by this. There'd be no need to declare a vacancy in that instance. The vacancy is just there. And again, if a councillor resigns, that is another reason why you wouldn't need to declare a vacancy. So the former three, what would happen is that the council currently would need to formally declare the vacancy at a council meeting. As a result of that, you can then go on and organise the resultant by-election. Now, what we found is that it can be seen as inefficient or untidy or unfair on the councillor involved, that there is a gap between the event that has caused them to be disqualified and the point at which the vacancy is declared. That is quite untidy from a local government point of view, especially when the law is very clear, which is that the council has no real option in declaring that vacancy. It must, I think it says it shall, I think is the correct word. Yeah. The council shall declare a vacancy forthwith. So there's no option for the council, when it considers it, to do anything else other than just declare it. So what we're proposing is that those the power to declare a vacancy in those specific reasons is delegated to the Chief Executive. That way, the event that causes the councillor to be disqualified can happen, and then the Chief Executive can then declare the vacancy straight away after that has happened. That is then a neat process, because otherwise you might get into a situation whereby somebody is, as recently happened, where a councillor ceases to be a member due to non-attendance at meetings, but they then don't cease to be a councillor until the point that the vacancy is declared. So effectively you have this sort of slightly murky situation that can be seen from outside in that sense. So by doing this, it makes it a lot neater, a lot fairer on both the councillor involved, and makes the process a lot more transparent. So when we say a councillor has been disqualified, they would be disqualified because the chief executive would have declared the vacancy. Hopefully that's explained it. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, just a quickie. How long will the chief executive have to declare that vacancy?
It's not really a given period of time. It would be that she has the power to do that. So she would do it as soon as possible. The law is very clear that she has, whoever does it, whether it's council or whether it would be her, they use the word forthwith. So there's not actually there's not a given timescale within the law. They have to do it as soon as possible. That's the way the law's written, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, it seems because it's a matter of just executing the law, pretty much. It seems like a reasonable idea. But I just wonder, just thinking through your list, could there be any circumstances where actually there could be a bit of debate about whether there could be a grey area about whether it should be, it actually is a case of a councillor needs, a vacancy needs to be declared or not? Because I just feel that if there were any kind of debate, then it would be better to leave it in elected members' hands.
I think it's important to distinguish or to separate out the operation of the law, which is and the arguing about whether or not we think somebody is disqualified or not. I think they would be quite different. I think that by doing it this way, there's an opportunity for those discussions to be held and for people to argue the toss about it, for want of a better phrase. But I don't think it's a case of members outside of the person involved would be involved, because it's not really up to members as to whether that person is disqualified. The law decides whether that councillor is disqualified or not. So we would argue about that and discuss that and make sure that process, the application of the law was done properly, and then we would announce that the person had been disqualified, and then the declaration would be made. Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah, I think Nick's explained it pretty well. I think what we're trying to say is, I think what you're saying, Councillor Hopkinson, there might be a situation where there's a debate as to whether they have or they haven't attended the relevant number of meetings, say, for example, in the situation where we had recently, and what constitutes attending a relevant meeting. But the legislation was changed a few years ago to be very specific, to say that it is 6 months attendance from the date of the last attendance. Prior to that change, there was some ambiguity to the wording, so it would be quite clear that you would look back to the last date when they'd attended, and then you would count forward 6 months, and it's very clear that it has to be a meeting where they are part of the meeting, so it's not just them turning up to observe or something like that. So that would be the situation. It's quite clear cut, but there may well be a bit of an argument, as there was recently, as to what constituted attending or whatever. We would sort that out. It wouldn't be that Democratic Services would say somebody hasn't attended 6 months of meetings and then Madeline would declare a vacancy. That's not how it would work. But it just means that once we've resolved the argument, we don't have to wait until full council. Because the problem is, at the moment, in the recent situation, the vacancy isn't declared until it's declared. And without the delegation, that has to be at full council. So you either have to call an extraordinary council meeting or you wait till the next scheduled council meeting. So this avoids that problem. So once we got to the point of decision, the chief executive can declare it. But it's not, she's not going to leap in and start declaring left, right and centre without discussing it with the relevant group leaders or whatever. I mean, that just wouldn't happen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to voice my support for this. Having been through a few years back, the situation we found ourselves in there, where actually members were voting against what is technically a lawful act to declare a vacancy, and I think we had to return to full council 3 times for that particular occasion. I think it's a very strange situation where members are asked to come to a full council meeting to vote on something that is the law that they have to vote on. So this makes perfect sense to me, and like Nick Hughes said, it's untidy if you do it any other way. It is very common across most councils to have this in place, and it was probably unfortunate that we didn't have it in place following the event, which I think was about, I can't even remember now, a few years back, 3 years back. So fully endorse it. Also, there is the gap that is left if we have to wait for full council hearing, because obviously that particular ward is probably without a functioning councillor. They might be very awkward for that councillor to still perform their roles, knowing that they're going to be disqualified, but they haven't technically been disqualified. So, and obviously there's also the financial implications of the receiving of allowance, etc. So I think you're right, this is a very tidy way of doing it, and just want to support it really in the right way forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just be interested. I know perhaps it's maybe not appropriate to go into the details of the individual, but I'd be interested in what the dispute was about in that time, because the whole question for me is, are there times where it is a matter of interpretation, or is it, as in the example you mentioned, is it actually always really clear cut? So I'm just interested in that example. How did it come to pass that there was 3 council meetings to debate it? If it was, I just wonder what the actual issue was in that case. I mean, I appreciate you may not be able to recall it, but
Sorry.
Can I just ask Mr. Hughes, is it appropriate to discuss that, bearing in mind we are recording and showing to the public?
So I don't think it's appropriate for us to go into the details of that, but I think one of the other reasons that we want to do this is that evidently when a councillor is disqualified, the party of which that councillor belongs to will be naturally extremely disappointed that that's happened. And then, not saying that it always happens, but then politics can then come into what is a relatively black and white application of the law. And so by allowing us to do this, it takes that temptation to go down that route away, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a non-debate anyway, because we come to council to declare the vacancy. We don't come to council to determine whether or not the councillor has been rightfully or wrongfully disqualified. That process takes place beforehand. Our duty when we come to full council is purely to vote the vacancy. So I think that's maybe where the misconception came in that particular instance that we had before. And yes, it doesn't. We don't need to go into detail, but that is a prime example of why this actually makes sense, because members were voting on the situation rather than voting on declaring the vacancy, which is 2 very separate things.
So yeah, thanks. That's helpful, because then so I can see that actually even in the current situation, it's not a matter of members actually deciding how the law is to be applied. So it's not. So in that case, I don't see any reason to oppose this suggestion, the proposal. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. So the Leader of the Council has asked Dem Services to propose a number of amendments to the Council Procedure Rules regarding elements of the Leader's Report. These are outlined in the report and they're shown at Annex 1. So if I let me just bring up Annex 1. So the proposed changes are that the leaders of other political groups, so if we just go through the process as it stands at the moment, the leader sends the leaders' report out to the opposition group leaders by close of business on the Saturday, isn't it? I think it is, before the meeting on the following Thursday. They then, those opposition group leaders, read the report, they come up with their questions, they come along to council, the leader of the council reads her leader's report out, and then each opposition leader in turn then asks questions to the leader. She then has an opportunity to answer those. So the changes that we're proposing is that the leaders of the other political groups must provide the leader and the chairman with any questions that they intend to ask as part of their response to the leader's speech. So we're asking them to submit in advance the questions. This will allow the leader a better chance to research the questions and provide a better answer on the evening. But obviously, given the fact that the timescales are quite short, what we've had to do is propose some slight tweaks to the timeline, as it were, and these are shown in Annex 1. So we're suggesting now that the leader provides her report 1 week prior to the meeting, so we're moving it from the Saturday to the Thursday, so close of business by the Thursday, and then that the leaders of the other political groups should submit their questions by close of business on the Tuesday prior to the meeting. Okay, and that then gives the leader and her team chance to research the answers and come up with an appropriate response for the meeting on the Thursday. So any questions that were not submitted by that Tuesday deadline would be ruled as inadmissible by the chairman, because obviously he would have got copied into the response, as we've said earlier, if they were then raised as part of the response to the leader's speech. So those are the proposed changes. Happy to take any questions.
Obviously, I do have to declare a sort of slight interest in this, even though it's not probably a full declaration. If committee members were to feel that this was maybe a complicated way forward, because I am very conscious of the fact that having to stand in the leader's shoes on the night and having prepared the report and sent it over to allow 5 days for the group leaders to study it, when the questions come back in, you've got a nanosecond really to work out the reply, and I think sometimes it could be there could be mistakes and maybe misleading advice because you haven't been given enough time to be able to consider it. But if members were of the committee, and this is a sort of counter proposal if you like, if they were uncomfortable with this approach, then the other approach could be that the leader is allowed to deliver their speech on the night, or their report on the night, so that makes it a level playing field between the leader giving out their report versus the group leaders to come back in with their questions. So it's a level playing field, so everybody's got the same amount of time to be able to, because without doubt it's it can be the leader's report, although the leader's obviously trying to relay what has been going on within the council and what they've been doing over the last the period of time between the full council meetings. It, in some way, is it can be a tool to expose some lack of knowledge or whatever, and it's just the fact that it just allows everyone to have a level playing field. So if members of the committee weren't and the chair weren't of a mind that this was a complicated way forward, that would be maybe an alternative solution to level it up a little bit, so that that everyone, you know, has a fair chance at the same amount of timing. I mean, I know that doesn't preclude the argument that the leader hasn't got enough time to prepare responses, but then it also means that the group leaders haven't got time to build in maybe sections of it that are, quite frankly, sometimes impossible to answer and give a genuine answer to. So I mean, obviously I have a vested interest in this, but it really is just the way of you know, being able to report to council. It's not just because it's me. I mean, it happens to any leader, and I think that, you know, that you do need time to prepare, but then if you don't have time to prepare to respond, then it should be the same for everybody coming back in. So it's just on how you feel about it, but it does feel a little bit, once when you're up there trying to answer, it does feel hellishly one-sided, and it is sometimes difficult to give an accurate response, and you don't really want to not give an accurate response. So that's why it's really come about. So thank you, Chair, for the indulgence.
Councillor Wojciechowski, can I just say before we ask you to carry on, I feel that this is the way forward, the original recommendation. Being an outsider and sitting at the back in the public gallery at council meetings, I think if we go down the route that is an alternative, you're going to end up with a lot of bickering between members at a council meeting, which we used to have years ago, and we obviously seek to eliminate that. And I think that's what could happen if you stood there, gave your report without anybody having a copy of it, and then questions are being thrown back at you, and it would just going backwards and forwards like a ping pong ball. And I think that could bring a little bit of disrepute into the way council meetings are held. So I think, personally, this way that's suggested is the way forward.
It's just I only just wanted to bring it in, Chair, because that's how it used to happen back in the day. I understand that leaders used to give their report on the night and the responses were on the night. So that was just that if members were uncomfortable with it, then it was just to maybe revert. I don't know when it changed and why it got changed, but that it was certainly the way it used to operate, and I think they find that's the way that it operates in Parliament. So I don't think that Boris Johnson gives Keir Starmer his heads up on what he's going to say on question time. So I don't know when it broke away, but it's just you know, I just felt that it was probably right to bring it to the working party just to have a discussion about it. Thank you.
That's okay, Chair, thank you. Actually, when you look at the proposal, it's all very reasonable, and I quite agree with it. I give the leaders time to answer questions, but obviously this is set a week in advance almost of the council meeting, and things happen in the week, that week, which may not have gone out on the leader's report, but the leader might then mention during their report, when they give their report, as it is, for example, I don't know, maybe something that is highly significant. Would the opposition leaders then be allowed to respond to that part of the leader's report if there'd be, let's call it an Annex A, that's happened recently and she's added, or he's added to their report on the night of the council meeting? I mean, I could try and dream up an example, but, you know, it could be as the Queen died or something, you know. Well, obviously, if the council leader is then going to say something about that during the meeting, then surely here it's saying that you can't ask any questions outside of it, but there should be, should the leader sway from the report, then the opposition should be allowed to sway from the report also, under those circumstances.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and I need to check with Estelle or with Nick on this, but I don't think that I can break the I think once I've published my report on the Saturday night, then I can't actually add or amend that report after I've issued it on the. I think that's right, unless it's. I mean, if it would be an exceptional, I mean, the chairman would probably be mentioning it. Yeah. So yeah.
So I was going to say yes. Generally, that is true. But if there was something super urgent that affected the council, not so much like the Queen dying, but something related to the council that you thought was important enough, you could ask the chairman and he could indulge you to say, that's fine for you to, because if it was like the elephant in the room, then yeah, I'm sure the chairman would be interested to hear from the leader. But obviously if that's the case, then if he was going to indulge the leader, then it would be fair for him to then indulge the other group leaders to allow comment upon that. But I don't think you would need to put that specifically in here. That would just be such a rare occasion that it would just be the privilege of the chairman to allow that.
Could that be included as a supplementary agenda if there was enough time notice? Like at the moment, the supplementary agenda is coming out the day before council meetings. Could that be occasion where that could happen or not?
Not we wouldn't do it as a supplementary agenda because the leader's report isn't included in the agenda. But if the leader wanted to get in contact with the chairman outside of the meeting and say, I'd really like to add this, but I didn't include it the week before, is it all right if I send it round? And he says, yes, that's fine. Then there wouldn't be anything stopping the leader then sending another email with an extra bit in it. That would be fine.
Thank you. Yeah, I can see some arguments in favour of this, but I do have some sort of reservations about it as well, which is that I can certainly see and sort of can empathise with the fact I'm sure it's not always entirely a pleasant experience for anyone to be the leader in that position. But I do think that there is a kind of democratic value to not having seen the questions in advance, and it's in no way a question on yourself or any of the leaders I've experienced, and this is my only term as a councillor. But I do think there's a value to expecting the leader of the council to be able to speak about the issues in their report. So, you might be right. It was an interesting point you made about whether that happens in Parliament, whether the leader of the opposition gives the questions. I mean, they might. I don't know if they do or not. Perhaps you know. But what I was thinking about before this meeting was, obviously we're on a much smaller scale here. But when a politician goes onto, a media, the Andrew Marsh or whatever, that of course we really wouldn't expect them to be told the questions in advance. We'd expect politicians to be able to field questions without that prior knowledge, and the reason for that being is that that kind of pressure on elected representatives is part of, I think, sort of democratic accountability, and I think there's a good argument for it from that point of view. But so I have a hesitation about that, and also about the idea of making it a level playing field. Again, I see the point there, but I think there is a difference between the leaders' report and the other group leaders' reports, in that the other group leaders are carrying out, I'd see that as a scrutinising process, whereas the leader, of course, is defending the actions of what the council is actually doing. So, yeah, I do have a hesitation about that. I mean, I'm very interested to hear what your thoughts are on that, but I do feel there's actually a democratic value to not being given the questions in advance, and I do feel it's an element of this discussion is, I sympathise with your position, but the fact that you of course are in this role at the moment, and I might be, if I was in that role, I might be less inclined to make the arguments I'm making, because when you're personally carrying out the role, I do sympathise with that there are certain pressures and things like that. But I do also think that there's a democratic value to not being given questions in advance. And also, I do think also another issue is that if questions are given in advance, the natural tendency, I'm sure I would do this, tendency is perhaps to be more likely to write a scripted answer. And again, I think though scripted answers they're less ideal than organic conversations in terms of making council meetings actually engaging and watchable for the public. I know that they're never going to be prime time TV shows, but I do think that I think that is an argument against. I just think it's a healthy part of our process in the chamber to actually have a sort of live conversation to the extent that we can achieve that.
Yeah, just come back on what Councillor Hopkins was saying there. My thoughts on that side of it is I like when the leader, whoever it might be, gives a report and then gets questioned on it, to have the answers to those questions. That to me is more important than having a journalistic kind of view to it, where right, let's see how we can clobber this person or anything like that. I want the answers, and so if I for example, discuss with my leader the leader's report and say, well, I want to know why this is this reason for this part of the report, I expect an answer, not, well, we'll get back to you because we haven't got the answer because we didn't know you were going to ask that question. So in my opinion, it's better to know the questions beforehand to give a fuller, more correct answer and get less of this, oh, I'll get back to you, I'll write to you about it, etc., etc. So on that basis, I'm more in favour of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with the sentiment that, you know, ideally we will actually want to hear an answer to the question. This is, but actually I was trying to think back, you know, I probably can't remember that well, but I don't get the impression generally that the leaders of the council, I've seen 3 now, haven't been able to answer those questions. I don't really remember too many. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that might not be the case. But for one thing, I'm not sure how common it is. But also, yeah, I agree we want to hear the answers, but you know, I'm not saying we need, you know, it's not common at all on the leaders I've seen. But, you know, expecting leaders, if leaders are in that role and they know, okay, I don't know what questions I'm going to get, then that affects the way you're going to carry out the role naturally. So, it would, you know, that's how scrutiny works, and that's why elected representatives are asked and are expected to answer questions, because it's, you know, if you're on top of what you're doing, you're going to be able to answer basically. And yeah.
Yeah, I fully take your point there. I mean, I spend something like 5, 6, 7 hours probably writing my report, which unfortunately I have to leave to the last minute, because as Councillor Leslie said, that, you know, you've got to wait until the last minute really, because otherwise you might be missing out on some vital piece of news that you might want to relay. So yes, and I understand what you're saying, if I understand it rightly, that obviously because I'm writing the report, and you don't have any assistance in writing the report, you know, obviously there are events that have been going on through the council, so you rely on the press releases, etc., that have gone through, but most of them have gone across my desk anyway. And some of it, you know, there's only so many hours in the week, and I can assure you that most reports that I do read very thoroughly, even for stuff that I don't even sit on, but there could be an opportunity to find a gap in the report that you're writing. So, you know, it is very difficult to, I mean, I like to pride myself in giving quite a full report. In fact, I think I went over time on the last report, and I don't like to see members glazing over when I'm halfway through it. I know that some of it can be a bit stodgy, but also the other danger as well is that if you open your heart out on your report and you don't have any opportunity to know what's coming back at you, the first time you get beaten over the head with a stick, the next time you don't open your heart out. So it then starts to become quite restricted content, and I don't want that to be. I will try and find the right balance, but also, you know, every human being has got a self-preservation order inside them, so you don't really want to leave yourself exposed, as it were. So I don't want to get to that stage, and that's unfortunately that has arisen over the last couple of meetings. So you know, I'm just trying to find the balance. I just don't feel that it's adding the value, and I think for people just to try and knock lumps out of you is not really the object of the exercise. The leader's report is really there to try and explain what the leader's been doing on behalf of the council, and other news that they might well come in, because when you're the leader, you have access to huge amounts of information that, say, the backbench councillors wouldn't necessarily have. So, you know, it's just a difficult balance, and I just feel that it's a little bit of an imbalance at the moment, and I'm not doing it. I can hold my own and I'm quite happy to have the questions, but I just don't think that we're actually adding tremendous value by doing it this way. I think members would be, as a councillor here has actually pointed out, that he would much rather have a detailed response, which I would be able to give if it was drilling down on something that maybe I've only just come across rather than actually had total involvement with. Because although you're the leader, you don't have in-depth, the officers are the ones that handle the process. Therefore, I wouldn't necessarily have details of full process. So if a member wanted to have details, then I would have to ask that officer, and it would have to be, I'll come back to you. And I don't actually like that. I'd like to be able to answer, but you're very nervous in answering something that you haven't got the full SP on. So, it's purely, that's why I wanted to bring it to the meeting today, was to gauge whether members felt that the way it's operating at the moment is of best value to the members and to the public who are obviously listening. So, either way, I'm quite relaxed about it.
Yeah, I take all those points on board. I wonder to what extent this, and the point from Councillor Rizicki as well, that of course we actually want to get the information when we're being asked, but to what extent, and I'm trying to recall the sort of mechanics of how meetings actually work, but to what extent can relevant officers be consulted at the time? If you're receiving a question that you haven't been shown in advance, and you might need to defer to some knowledge of the officers, which is obviously totally understandable.
They quite often come back and say, "Well, we'll let you know."
Yeah,
I've seen it so many times.
I think of course, I think we all, I hope appreciate and understand. Sometimes it's fair enough that you haven't got the answers to some things. And there obviously are times where it's totally fair enough to say that's not something I can answer at the moment. But yeah, and I do see the value in the points you're making, that you're going to be able to present the information if you've got 2 days to look it up, whatever it is. But I still do think that there's a lot of value in this, in no way a comment on yourself or any of the leaders I've seen, but a comment on expecting the leader to be able to demonstrate, demonstrate something beyond, because otherwise almost the entire meeting becomes scripted. And then there's very little sense of what the leader as an individual, actually really is on top of, or what their real positions actually are. So I just feel that organic element is actually quite vital.
Yeah, the thing is about officers stepping in council. Officers don't have a role to speak in council, so the only officers normally who would speak in council would be the chief executive or the monitoring officer, and even then they would very rarely speak. So the whole point of council is it's a debating chamber for the councillors. So unlike cabinet or another committee where you could bring in an officer and say, could so and so please clarify this point. Yeah, so that role's not there for officers to sort of step forward in the meeting itself.
If I can just make a final point, fully accept what you're saying. I mean, the leader should be able to ad-lib, and I can ad-lib. But I don't like ad-libbing because sometimes you just have to say things that you're not 100% sure about behind it. But getting back to my original point, it's a leader's report. It depends whether members expect the leader's report to only contain subjects that they are very, very familiar with and they have been totally involved in. If the members prefer a leader's report that tells them what the council has been doing in the period between the previous council, then that's an entirely different matter. I like to report what the whole council's been doing. I haven't necessarily been intimately involved with that particular subject, so therefore I'm leaving myself slightly exposed by not having the full information. So my report, it depends, and it goes with the members. Do the members want a report from the leader that reports what has been happening right the way through the council, or do the members want the leader to report on what the leader's been doing, bearing in mind half the stuff the leader does you can't report on anyway, because it's stuff that isn't to be discussed in open council. So, you know, it could be a couple of liner. I can show you my calendar, but where I've been, that doesn't, you know, which is, and for someone that has somewhere on average 5 meetings a day, you know, there is evidence that there is a lot of activity there, but sometimes you can't report on it. So I suppose the debate here has got to be, it depends what type of report the members expect the leader to report on. Do you want a report on what I've been doing, which I can answer completely in full detail about any questions that are coming back in? Or do you want a report about what the Cabinet and we've all been involved in regarding the mechanics of the council? So, sorry, you know, that's the position. I think I'm thinking of it that I like to report for the whole. But if I'm going to be asked questions of a finite detail of that, then I can only put stuff in my report that I have finite knowledge of. So I'm just trying to get the value to the members, really, to all the members. But so on that note, that would be my final comment.
I'd like just to add to that, that if there's a committee that have done some work that the leader is not on, and the question is thrown at her on the night she presents her report, she's not going to be able to answer that, and it's going to be like the Prime Minister's reply, isn't it? I refer to the reply I gave earlier, and so with this system, it gives the leader a chance to go to that committee and say, well, look, I've been given this question. What is the answer to it? And then she can give a satisfactory answer, hopefully, to the questionnaire and to the remainder of that questionnaires party, who may be well aware of the question that's being put forward. In that case, can I have, the recommendation is that the Constitutional Review Working Party recommends the Council makes the amendments to Council Procedure Rule 2.4 regarding the Leader's Report as outlined in Annex A to the report. Do members wish to make any recommendations to the Standards Committee? Could I have a proposer? Councillor Brzezinski, and a seconder, please. I can second it. Do members agree? All agreed? You're against. Okay.
Can I vote? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. Right, now come to item 6, members' questions. Hopefully Estella's thawed out by now and she'll be able to present the report. Yeah, it's been floated. It's questions from members to the council.
It's on the council webpage. You're not.
Ah, yeah. I think it was published 3 days ago, 2 days ago.
I had trouble getting it and I eventually got it.
I just need a refresh.
It's very brief.
It's a supplementary agenda.
Councillor Ashby's got a spare copy if you want it. Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. So first of all, I want to apologise for the lateness of this report. I only managed to do it yesterday. So the reason you haven't got it, Councillor Hopkinson, is my fault because I was so late to the party. I was on leave last week, and then the week before that, I was just completely stacked out with stuff. So I do apologise. Anyway, it's very brief, and I can explain it. So this is a report to consider revisions to the rules on members' questions to Council, which is under Rule 14 in Part 4 of the Constitution, Rules of Procedure. And we're specifically talking about Rule 14.6, Scope of Questions, and Rule 14.8, Supplementary Questions. So it's only to do with questions from members to other members, not to do with questions from the public to members, which we, letting them have free rein because they are the public. So in terms of members' questions, this issue has arisen because we've had a few questions lately in council meetings where the questions have either been related to sort of simply operational matters that really would be better addressed to the head of service or whatever for a very straightforward answer, and they've been raised as a question in council, or they've been, the example I can think of, there was a question about planning that was really related to nationwide planning policy, planning policy that's not really within our remit, but it was sort of aligned to the local plan, sort of not. It was a slightly sort of strange question, shall we say, but because of the rules. So there are rules that say when questions will and will not be accepted, and that's in 14.6 scope of questions, and I've repeated those existing rules under section 2. There's not a lot of leeway for saying a question shouldn't be allowed, and so the issue came up as to whether we should, or you should as members, look at whether these rules should be revised a little to be a bit clearer about how we allow questions and what we should say should go forward. The final decision on whether a question should be allowed sits with the chief executive, but in consultation with the chairman. So as a general rule, I must explain this, when we get a question through, we as officers, and they'll come to Nick or James, then they'll come to, and if there's a bit of is this question admissible or not, then it would generally come to me. I'd have a look at it, we'd discuss it with Madeline, she'd then discuss it with the chairman, and etc. But as officers, our sort of instinct, if you like, is to always allow questions, because obviously that's the democratic process. But if there is an issue with a question, then we need to be clear about what that issue is and give it some serious thought. So it was requested that we brought this to CRWP for a discussion, but there was no real clarity on what the revision should be. Hence, I haven't made any recommendations. But I have put in there in red a couple of things that have, occurred to me thinking about it in discussion with Nick because of the recent issues. So, for example, the first thing, under 14.6 in red, so we might reject a question if it's related to a straightforward operational matter which should be directed at a service director. So, for example, that might be if somebody raised a question that said, when will my bin be emptied or something like that. I mean, I'm not saying someone would raise a member's question like that, but it might be something like that. Or, and this one arose recently, going down to the bottom of the list, relates to a matter that has already been raised as a standards complaint against a member and which has not yet been concluded through that procedure, through the Code of Conduct Procedures. And I put that in because it seems rather unfair to ask a member to publicly comment about a matter that may well be going through the Code of Conduct process at the time. And then on supplementary questions, I've just added in, let's have a look. So it says the supplemental question must arise directly out of the original question or the reply. We've had a few instances recently where supplementary questions have been a bit wide-ranging, and really their connection to the original question or answer has been a bit tenuous. And the chairman has the authority to not allow those supplementary questions. And we have discussed with the chairman that he perhaps needs to be a little more robust in jumping in if he thinks that's the situation. So I've just written that in. The chairman will be robust in refusing to allow questions which do not arise directly out of the original question or reply, and the chairman's view on the issue will be final. His view on the issue would always be final because he's the chairman. But it's just to reiterate that. So it's just for you as members to consider whether you like those revisions, whether you don't like those revisions, and whether you want anything else in or different. And that's it really. And then from that, we'll have to form some recommendations because I haven't got any recommendations. I'll turn myself.
Yeah, thank you, Estelle. That's a report. The only thing I would question on there is on the actual first thing related to a matter which has already been, sorry, go back up again, related to a straightforward operational matter which should be directed to service director. A lot of the council have had problems, certainly in the last year or so, if not 2 years, and actually getting hold of anybody to talk about anything. And so I can understand why they would bring that kind of question, even if it was just about somebody's bin, to council when they can't get a reply from the officers in charge. And you know, we've all been there. We've all asked a question, never even got acknowledgement of the email. So I would be reluctant to support not being allowed to ask about an operational matter, even if it was straightforward, in a council question. I'd be reluctant to rule that out. Thank you.
Yeah, only to say that I think if a question came in that was to do with a straightforward operational matter and that we didn't allow it because this rule was in, what we'd be saying is we would make sure it was answered through the service director, so it was answered in that way. But I understand what you're saying. But I think I've put it in there because it, you know, questions by members to members at council, even though it doesn't say it, they're supposed to be on sort of, you know, strategic or important issues. You know, they're not meant to be on, you know, when is my bin emptied?
So, I agree with you on that, Estelle, totally. But the problem is, having sat here since, feels like you're a dot, but for a few years now, is that yes, you ask a question, you send an email, and you don't even get a reply. And that's where, when the frustration builds up, that you go to council and ask a question.
Is it possible that if the matter was for a service director, can somebody within your department guarantee that that service director replies? I think it's highly unlikely, but miracles do happen.
Well, the irony is, if it came in as a question to council, it would get a reply because the service directors provide the replies for council. So,
Yeah, but if you're taking it out,
QED. Well, the problem is I might then miss it and might make, you know, so I probably can't give you that guarantee. But I understand the point, Councillor Rozecki, but I'm trying to sort of, you know, have the issue being raised about member questions and the slight sort of nonsensical nature of a few of them recently, not all of them by any means, but one or two of them, you know, we've just come to think about it. But I take the point.
Yeah, just support what Councillor Rozecki said, that for that reason it's yeah, it would be I'd be more inclined to support this if that issue was not or if it wasn't an issue. I'm also just thinking, you know, perhaps with one or two of the other ones as well, that there's a question about how do we address these things through a constitutional change or through culture and maybe training, and perhaps to some extent, you know, perhaps it's not always a great idea to always have the reflex of it's a constitutional change, and perhaps that is something that can be addressed through training for members. On the second one sounds very reasonable to me. It sounds like a good suggestion. The third one, I just wonder, is that not already implicit in what goes before? So it says a member asks, this is 14.8, a member asking a question under those two rules may ask one supplementary question without notice of the member to whom the first question was asked. And then it says the supplemental question must arise directly out of the original question or the reply. So isn't that already implicit in there? I mean, it's, I don't know. I mean, I know you're just like trying to give us suggestions on a limited brief, but yeah, I mean.
Just thinking on the last point, would members want us to be clearer to say, actually, because what I've noticed at council meetings is that supplementary questions have got a tendency to be a bit speechy, for want of a better word, rather than asking a question. So we could make it very clear to say, actually, supplementary questions are questions. It's not an opportunity for members to say, well, I think this is outrageous, blah, 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 blah. It's a question. That's the point of a supplementary question. It's not a speech and a question. So we could potentially put that in if members thought that was helpful.
Thank you. Yeah. So going back to some of the earlier points, Councillor Hopkinson raised. Oh no, sorry, Councillor Rozecki. I'm of the mind, and I might be wrong here, I might have dreamt it, that we are in the process of developing a portal, a members portal for reporting. Now, once that's rolled out, because I think this was something that I think I spoke about this about 8 years ago, so I'll be delighted to see it, because in my experience, going back to 2015 and coming from an operational background, we've got 56 councillors that are all reporting on stuff. Sometimes we've got shared wards. Most of us have got shared wards. Some wards have got 3 councillors. They might be a cross-party politically, and we're all trying to achieve that end result. So there could be a lot of crossover between who's asking who's asking what route they're taking. So I think it's fine to have that related to straightforward operational matters, but I think the caveat should be if full process has already been exhausted, because what should happen as a ward councillor, and as you rightly know, you try and resolve it yourself, and you must communicate with the head of service, for the director of service, for that. If you don't get a response from that, and you're unhappy, technically the next route you should take is the cabinet member that has that portfolio item related to what you're trying to solve. If that gets exhausted, then you have got to use a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and you have got to raise it at full council. But hopefully the process should never get there. You know, a matter of somebody's bin not being emptied should never hit full council, because it is, and I'm trying to word this correctly in so as to not offend anybody, is that it's a next level up. You know, the council needs to operate at strategic type decisions, policy decisions, that type of decisions. And I think, and for people that haven't, for members that haven't actually sat on cabinet, they have to understand how much effort goes into answering these questions. It might be a real minor question, but an officer has to sit down and write the response, which will usually be a senior officer. So that's officer's time. The member involved has to then study that, and they have to work out, they've got to respond to that. There is a hell of a lot of work that actually goes into answering a question that might, to an individual member, might be really significant to them, but on the overall scheme of things, I mean, senior officers' time is really valuable to us as members. And you know, we must have exhausted a lot of avenues before we actually, this is the last resort in a way. So I'll be pleased to know, and it's not for here, but to know how the data collation portal is coming along, because I think actually that is where that comes in, rather than it actually getting to this stage. And I think that tool would be invaluable to all of us members trying to get things done. I mean, that's, I suppose, I'm slightly outside, I'm slightly privileged and outside of that struggle, because as leader you do tend to be able to get things a bit moved along a little bit quicker, let's say. So, but a lot of members do exhaust it through the cabinet, and then if the cabinet are struggling, they come to me, and then I have a little bit of a say, and then it does escalate. But I would hope that we could sort it out at that level rather than it actually coming to full council. Now, of course, there is the issue, which I think I've put here, political posturing. And I think this is, I don't know how you quite write it in here, but supplementary questions are usually used to make a political statement or a personal grandstanding, or however you want to call it, but it definitely goes on. I mean, I've done it myself, so I'm guilty of it. So, you know, I think to be in value to the residents of Thanet, that it needs to be more about a specific question to get a specific answer to not only the members but to the residents. That's what we're here for, the residents, to get an answer that they want, rather than hearing about somebody's you know, intimate feelings about the social policies of something that's really coming out of Westminster, not coming out of here. So it's all about getting the right value to the residents from our time and our officers that we've got here, rather than just, you know, going off in some sort of... If you watch back some of the full council meetings, it's actually quite amazing, the questions that come back, you know, the response to the answers to the questions. And, you know, they are a little bit offline as far as coming back with a straightforward question. But how you frame all of that into one sort of statement, I don't know, but it should be pure questions coming back, not political posturing.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember different points I had. Sorry, trying to gather my thoughts on the various things here. But so I'm interested in, I didn't quite understand what the tool was that you were referring to, but it seems to me that, maybe a way to look at it is that actually is more of the solution rather than an amendment to the Constitution. Because, and also I did take what you said in a way to be an argument not to have that First Amendment, because you did acknowledge that, well, actually it is there as a last resort if things aren't working. And yeah, so ideally members won't use it in a sort of trigger happy way or, frivolously, but actually if things aren't working, and sometimes they're not always working as they should, then then it has to be brought up, and it is, but at the same time, we don't want members doing it when there is another way. But like explaining this, this flow of how, making sure all members really do know the flow of this is who you should approach and how. I see that as really the way to address it. I don't think we need personally don't see it as we need a constitutional change, and I think, it's better if we can leave members to make up their minds about what they do and don't want to ask about, as long as they're doing it from an informed point of view. Which is also, I'm trying to remember what I had to say about the other one. I mean, the question of, it's the chair of the council has the role of deciding whether a supplementary question is it too speechy or political point scoring or not. But again, I feel I like the idea that decision is made by elected members, and the chair. That's obviously, chair's got a really important role in that, and it doesn't have to actually be like emphasised in the Constitution. I mean, it is there implicitly anyway that the supplementary question has got to arise directly from the original question and apply. And I think we've certainly got a chair currently who understands that, because somebody sometimes makes that point, and I'm sure we could expect future chairs to understand that as well. But I suppose I'm a bit averse to putting things in the Constitution rather than getting members to make these decisions themselves with understanding the full picture.
Thank you, Chair. So I was just trying to sort of summarise, I think, what people are saying. So first of all, Councillor Hopkinson, the member sort of portal thing is an app that is being developed by a digital team, and they spoke to our heads of service meeting this morning about how they were getting on with it, and they seem to be making pretty good progress, and they seem to be all over it. So that's going to be hopefully really useful and a better way for members to communicate issues to us. So I think what we're saying on the bits in red, I think, because I'm trying to find a way of formulating a recommendation. So are you saying that we would leave it in, so it would say, so scope of questions, a question shall not be defamatory, frivolous or offensive. Second one, related to a straightforward operational matter which should be directed at the service director, comma, unless all avenues have been exhausted. All usual processes have been exhausted, or something like that.
I just wonder if another way wouldn't be, this sounds great, the app, but once that's working, if we see that's working, then perhaps it'd be a time to revisit this. So an option would be to leave it for now, and then if the app actually does, I can well imagine if it's successful, it could take away this concern that Councillor Rosecki and I have expressed about not always being able to get answers when you're asking for them. If that is taken out of the council culture through this app, then I would personally be a lot more inclined. I wouldn't have an issue with the first red amendment.
Yeah, I think I can agree with you there, but only that needs to be in there once the app is up and running and fully operational, because if a member feels that they can get a quicker result by bringing it to full council rather than going through proper process, then I think that needs to be in there if we have got the tools to allow them to do the proper process beforehand. So if the app comes into effect and it is successful and it is a good working tool, then that definitely needs to be in the Constitution, because they will bypass the work. It's harder work to do it that way than it would be to actually just bring a question to full council. So I would agree. I'm agreeing with you both on both occasions. Yes, it doesn't need to be in here now, but we do need the app, and then once we've got the app, then I think it needs to come in, because otherwise, I might be accusing members of doing them an injustice here, but I would imagine they will still try and short circuit it by bringing the question to council, and that's really where we are. Is that we must exhaust all avenues given to us, and I think this tool really does give us a really good mechanism. So I'm just delighted that it's going to come online, and members will be able to do that, because the list that's outstanding will be able to be scrutinised, so that can go to scrutiny. So, you know, there will be nowhere to hide. So in fact, I think this element here, and I would recommend that this actually comes in when we know that the app is fully operational. So yes, we could revisit it at that point, I think.
I was going to say that, have we got a time scale of when this app is up and running, first of all?
Yeah. No, I don't. I mean, I can check that with the digital team. But I mean, they're working on it with, and I've seen a sort of a mock-up of it, but I'm not quite sure when it's going to be rolled out. But it's, you know, it's not too long, I don't think.
Just going on the back of what Councillor Ashby was saying, about this needs to be in when the app's up and running. I think when we do put it in, the wording has got to constitute that the app has been used, so that we, you know, the members have used the app to try to resolve the issue before they start doing anything else.
Would it be fair if we made a note as officers to bring this, but just this one bit back in 6 months' time? I think, because I think that I would certainly hope, not putting timescales into digital's thing, but I would certainly hope that in 6 months' time it would be up and running, and we would have a number of other things we can talk about as CRWP and bring that back as one of the things in the autumn, hopefully.
That was my view entirely. Do you want to say anything, Councillor Hopkinson? I haven't heard what we've just said.
No, nothing other than that sounds like a really good idea, yeah.
So can I ask that?
Oh, sorry, just there's one other element which is existing, substantially the same as a question which has been put to the meeting, the council, in the past 6 months. It's just some clarification around. I mean, I know that's an existing part of the Constitution. It's just that there do seem to be some questions that are fundamentally the same, but they come back and they come in another form within less than the 6 months. That was, I think, maybe just some clarification on how we gauge the substantially.
I think you raise a valid point, and one of the things that certainly I think that we as Dem Services have noticed is that the questions from the repeat questions element you refer to is only about questions that members have asked. It's not about questions that the public have asked. So, for example, if you said, I don't know what's happening with Margate Beach this month, and a member asked that, at the next council meeting, a member of the public could then ask exactly the same question when somebody's already answered that a month ago. So that could be something that you could say, actually, we could suggest saying that if any person has asked that question at council, then a member couldn't ask that question within that 6 months. We could tweak that, and that would reduce the number of repeat questions. With regard to the other element of it, which is not wishing to get into a debate, but I think, yeah, some topics are very, very big, and if we said, okay, let's just not talk about the harbour, or let's not talk about something else, planning. You could, planning, for example, you could inadvertently block a number of questions which potentially could be individually meritorious, I think, for want of a better term. I don't know, that's probably a bit pretentious, that word, isn't it? Sorry. But had merit in the sense of they were valid questions, but because they touched on a subject that was a wider subject, they would just get chucked out. So it's just a case of trying to find that balance between the two.
Can I ask then that we all agree that the matter in relation to agenda item 6, members' question, is put back until we have more clarification in relation to the portal, and then we can perhaps discuss in length the questions. We may need to rewrite even some of the existing points that are in the Constitution already. I don't know.
So I think what we're saying, I think we could probably take some of this forward, and then we simply put back the issue of the operational matter. So we take that out, we leave that out, we wait for the portal, we see, and we bring this back in 6 months' time after the portal is operational. I think you said that the issue, and I think this is quite a good one to put in. So if a matter is related to something before standards that's not yet concluded, we won't allow a question on it, and I think that's only fair. I think you thought that was fairly non-contentious. So we could actually leave that one in as a recommendation. And then I think what you were saying under supplementary questions, and this was raised by you, Councillor Hopkinson, we take out what I've put in red because that's implicit and the chairman's already pretty good at being all over things. But you might want to put in something, or you might not, about saying a supplementary question must not comprise a speech. A supplementary question is not a speech. It's something that Nick was saying.
It's not a comment on the previous answer, it's a question, isn't it?
Yeah.
A statement?
Yeah. Supplementary questions should be questions,
Not a statement. Would that sound all right with you, Stan?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's whether you're happy with it. Councillor Howard Hopkinson, I'm not sure he's happy with it, but...
Could we insert after the word or the reply that it must be a question and not a statement, something along those lines?
Yeah, I think what we're saying is we take out all of that in red, because I think we're agreeing that we don't need to be quite so prescriptive about the chairman's powers. I think we've agreed that the chairman's powers are there, and chairman's pretty good at exercising those powers. So take all that bit out in red, and we say something like, as you said, Chair, the question must be a question, not a statement. I don't know whether we want to say that or not.
Well, I think possibly the wording could be the supplemental question must be a question,
not a statement,
and not arise direct. Put something.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's positive. Have you got that, James?
I think, I mean, we all know there's quite a few wordsmiths in our gatherings. So, you know, if you're a good wordsmith, then you can make a statement turn into a question anyway. So it's just, yeah. So I think it's just underlining it, really. It's probably not, we can't build it into the Constitution, but something I would like to get across, and I think I've said it on 2 or 3 occasions at full council. You know, the door of the leader and the door of the cabinets are always open, and so members hopefully should feel that they can actually come and ask this question without actually having to put it through council, because it is far more effective. You can get things done in a nanosecond that way, and I like to feel that any members of any political persuasion that come to me and ask me to help them with a situation, that I can actually help them out, and they probably don't have to wait the 6 weeks to go to full council and do the question. So, you know, I think maybe members, maybe they feel nervous about coming and asking for you know, for help out on something. But it's certainly something that I think members would actually find quite useful, that they could actually get something done through that mechanism, because the cabinet and the leader obviously can get things done because they have portfolio meetings with the chiefs and what have you. So, you know, it's something to be remembered, even if it's not constitutionally wordable, if you like. But, you know, that's really what the cabinet and the leader are here for, is to try and help all members. It's not just to get things done for their own group. So, you know, it is important for that. And if they exercise that correctly, there probably would be less need to bring it to... they can always pick the phone up and ask me the question. They don't have to wait for full council.
Can I ask, do we need to do something today with it, with this extra recommendation, or can we put it back?
Well, I think we've got some revisions, haven't we, that we need to include in a recommendation. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah.
At least those two.
At least those two. So, can I suggest that we take a vote on a recommendation to revise sections 14.6 and 14.8 of the rules of procedure with the wording as amended, or something like that, and which James will have skillfully put together. Which is basically, it's basically, to summarise, we're not going to include my first bit in red, which is about operational matters. We're going to include the second bit in red, which is related to a matter already before the standards complaint. And under supplementary questions, we're going to take out their entirety in red, but we're going to include, we're going to say something like...
Must be a question and not a statement.
Yeah. The supplementary question must be a question, not a statement, and must arise directly out of the original question or the reply.